Morning, everybody, or whenever it is that you decide to watch this. This is our chapter 3 and chapter 4 lecture for Foundations of Communication. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. There we go, chapter 3 and 4. So I am going about this in different ways. You can click this and it'll have like a list of the chapters, or you can just go to that drop down and go to the chapters. So we're in chapter 3, and chapter 3 is verbal communication and the nature of what language is. And so language is a system of symbols structured by rules and patterns common to a community of people. Symbols are words, sounds, gestures, visual images that represent a thought, concept, or object or experience. The meaning is a person's interpretation of a symbol. I feel like all three of those are some of those terms that you're going to get. It's not really something that requires a lot of memorization, but then there's some that could, right? So bypassing. This is a communication problem that arises when the same words mean different things to different people. And so in class, some of our students had brought that up in regards to, when there's incompetence, right? Being aware of your incompetence or being unaware of your incompetence. A lot of times that can fall under the bypassing, because someone might have something that they believe that word to mean, and then others might have another meaning for it, right? So that is what we would consider in communication bypassing, right? Denotative meaning is the restrictive or literal meaning of a word. So it's like what the word denotes, right? The denotative meaning of the word. Connotative meaning is the personal, subjective meaning of a word. The concrete meaning is the meaning that refers to something that can be perceived with one of the senses. An abstract meaning refers to something that cannot be perceived or experienced with one of the other senses. Culture is a learned system of knowledge, behavior, attitudes, beliefs, values, rules, and norms that is shared by a group of people and shared from one generation to the next. We've talked a little bit about that in regards to, what's avowed and what's ascribed, and how your beliefs, attitudes, and, culture is developed through that. Co-culture is a culture that exists within a larger cultural context. And then neologism is a new term that's been introduced into a language, right? So you can think, when you see that word, think new, right? So the power of words, which we talked about a lot in the lecture so far, of just the sound of words, the frequency of words, what mantra is, right? There's 5 primary ways in which words have power. The power to create and label experiences, to communicate feelings, to affect thoughts and actions, to shape and reflect culture, and to make and break relationships. So there's a lot of power in what words we choose to use. So when we have to confront biased languages, there's certain, terms we can use to create that awareness, we'll say. Confronting is a little bit aggressive, but it is what it is in a lot of cases. So allness is a word barrier created through the use of language that reflects unqualified, often untrue generalizations that deny individual differences or variations. So there's like an allness to, the concept. And people just assume that allness is, what it is. And so it creates like an all-inclusive type of way of using the word. Sexist language That's language that reveals bias in favor of one sex against the other. Generic language, general terms that stand for all persons or all things within a given category. Homophobic language goes into the sexist language, a language that overly denigrates persons of non-heterosexual orientations, and usually arising out of fear of being labeled gay, lesbian, queer, right? And so this sexist language is, can be those terms as well. And so homophobic and sexist do come together, except homophobic is only in the case of going against, if you're going against heterosexual orientation. Transphobia language, a resistance to transgenderism and antagonism towards transgender people. So it would be a transphobia. And then heterosexual language, language that reveals an assumption that the world is heterosexual, like everything is, male, female, as if other orientations did not exist. And so this confronting bias, like I talked a little bit about this in the face-to-face class. You have to forgive me because I'm teaching 2 face-to-face comms and then 1 online comms. So sometimes I'm like, what have I said? What have I not said? So I might repeat myself like an 80-year-old. But, confronting bias languages is probably one of the hardest things you'll face as, a professional adult. It's something that we have to learn because there are, things that we've grown up with or things that within our culture that is normal, and in a lot of cases it's not. And so, like for me, I was born in the 80s and went through middle school in the 90s and then high school in the 2000s, and like that, the heterosexual language has actually just changed in the last 5 years. So that's been, a huge change for us that are, older, really above 30. And so there's a lot of this heterosexual language. There's a lot of this allness. And people just, and that really comes from, I hate to say ignorance, but it comes from, an unawareness. And so a lot of times if someone's used to having to deal with that language, it can be frustrating. And so, we have to understand that within the foundations of communication, you're learning how to deal with these things, to communicate to people, to get your points across, to not confront, create arguments, but to create clarity, right? So that we can all be one and get along and be able to understand each other. And a lot of that has to do with, our upbringing, our ideologies, what was avowed and what was ascribed, right? So we're using words to establish supportive relationships, and we want to create that supportive communication, right? Language that creates a climate of trust, caring, and acceptance. And that's what we're working with here. Defensive communication, that's why I think that word confronting is a bit of defensive, obviously. It creates a bit of hostility and mistrust when you go in to a conversation with this like defensive tone. Polarization is the tendency to describe things in extremes as though there's no middle ground in between. It's like, I'm going to be super polarized about it and I'm way over here, when there is a middle ground and there could be, something that isn't way over there or way over here, right? And trigger words are forms of language that are around strong emotions in listeners. So everyone could be very different about their trigger words. It just kind of depends about, again, how they grew up in their ideology. Empathy, the ability to understand and feel what another person is feeling. So if we go to the blackboard,
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. So I'm sure some of you have definitely dealt with, you know, this concept of empathy and sympathy. And I actually, last semester I didn't use this. Another professor was using this video, and I think for me, even me, like empathy, I had a different, in my mind, in the like spiritual work world. When I say spirituality, spiritual work world, I mean like higher consciousness, like working with meditation, yoga, health and fitness, things like that. When we talk about empathy, often we're talking about when you are like, yeah, you can empathize with someone, like in the video, the bear comes down and says like, I know how you're feeling, and turns the light on. But in our line of work, it's a slippery slope, because when you do that, you take on that mindset or that feeling, and if you're too empathetic, you tend to almost match the frequency of the person, and so you become kind of like you jump on their boat, right? And so it's an interesting thing. And then sympathy is like keeping the separation. And so it's interesting because like that video, it almost seemed like the person that was sympathetic was kind of like numb to it and wasn't willing to, sympathize. So I thought that was an interesting way of understanding that there's a lot of polarization. Like I think that description of sympathy and empathy was very polarized, and there is like a middle ground with empathy and sympathy, right? But in the end, when we think about empathy, it's the ability to understand and feel what another person is feeling. I think that for me, I was very sensitive to car accidents. I've been in a few of them, and anytime I pass a car accident on the highway, I feel this like sense of like, oh, I hope they're okay. And that's this empathy, right? Like you can feel what another person is feeling. All right, so chapter 4 reading. I wonder what this is because I haven't looked at this. And it might be a document. Let's see. Okay. This was something I scanned in. So let's look and see if it actually shows it to us. Yay. Okay. So this is I scanned in the beginning of our chapter 4 page here. And maybe I scanned the whole thing in. Oh, cool. Yeah. So I actually scanned in the whole chapter for you guys so you can read it here. It's just like, it's funny. It wasn't funny, but my book got really wet. And so I think I was doing that so that I could read it on here because I couldn't stand that the pages were wet. So there's the chapter 4 there. So that's kind of nice for you guys if you need it. Okay. So chapter 4 gets into nonverbal communication and interactive synchrony, coordinated of speech and body movements between at least two speakers, interactive synchronization, mimicry, intentional mirroring of another person's verbal and nonverbal communication. I talked about this in one of my face-to-face classes because I'm from the Valley, and one of our students, really tall, Luis, keeps coming in late. I hope he stops doing that. He is from the Valley, and I picked up on that as soon as he came in late the first day. I was like, he said a couple of things, and I was like, oh, I could see in his mannerisms that he was from the Valley. And if you're from the Valley, you know what I'm talking about. For the most part, if you're aware of that, you won't become aware of it. If you've just left the Valley and this is your first outing, then you're going to become aware of it very quickly. People hear in the way that we speak, and it's interesting because when I get around people like my high school friends from the Valley, I pick up on this way of speaking, and like even the way that they move my hands, and like the way that I move my head, and like, just it's a mimicry that you pick up and you don't realize that you do it, right? And so this is a nonverbal behavior. And so types of nonverbal behaviors, facial expressions in silence, smell, time, vocal innotations like going up and down, right? Body gestures and touch, right? So these are all considered nonverbal communication tools. And so the question is, why focus on nonverbal? Nonverbal communication is our primary means of communicating feelings and attitudes towards each other. As a yoga teacher and as a professor, the nonverbal tells me a lot about you guys. And that's the reason why online classes are so hard to really create community and connect. Which, speaking of that, I'm going to create y'all's teams because that does help. I found that the Teams chat does help. I'm balancing a lot of things, you guys. I teach 6 classes. I have businesses outside of the university. So sometimes I'm a little late on my teams, but I'll get it there for you guys. You guys have a lot going on. It'll come in handy soon. So, but the nonverbal is something that we can't see. Like, you guys can see me, but I can't see your reaction to me. When I'm in a face-to-face, I can see people's nonverbal reactions. I can see when I say the word transphobia, who in there understands and who in there has never heard it before. Right? And I can see it on people's faces. People don't even realize when they don't like something or when they're disgusted, they show it on their face. They don't even know. Right? They do not even realize that they're showing that nonverbal behavior. When someone is sad, they're in class and they have like a rounded back, or they're like this, right? Or if someone's mad, they have their hands on their hips, right? These are all nonverbal behaviors that we have to pay attention to. Part of listening is noticing the nonverbal. And usually the nonverbal messages are more believable than the verbal messages, right? It's like, someone asks, you're not okay with it. Someone asks, are you okay with something, right? And you're like, yeah, that's fine. Well, the nonverbal told you it wasn't fine, right? And so that's part of where you have to like have that awareness of that and be able to talk about it. It's critical in initiation, development, and termination of relationships, right? When you start a relationship, you need to be paying attention to that nonverbal. You know, usually when first dates occur and the partner in the date is not listening to the, you know, I ask you, what do you like to do on Saturdays and Sundays, you know, and then I don't listen to anything you have to say, you know, that person's not going to want to go on another date because they're not listening. They don't even ask me any questions, right? Things like that. And then that nonverbal communication is critical in, you know, terminating relationships so that, you know, things can end smoothly, whether that be in a professional sense or a personal sense. Nonverbal messages function as substitute for complement, contradict, repeat, regulate, and accent verbal messages, right? And so, again, you know, when you're speaking, when you guys do your YouTube channel videos and you're doing your who am I, use your hands, right? You want to be standing straight up. Really, if you're sitting down, that's fine, but be aware of how you look, right? Your confidence. Are you relaxed? How is the lighting? Can you see? Can I see you, right? It's very important. The nature of nonverbal communication is that it's a culture-bound nature, right? And it's rule-governed nature of nonverbal. So these are getting into terms that for sure you need to be taking notes because you will not really remember this. It's not something that we're taught naturally, right? So the culture-bound nature of nonverbal is that, like in the Valley culture, when I see people speaking and I can hear them, it's a cultural thing and I know that they're from the Valley. Rule governed nature of nonverbal is definitely based on laws and rules that are placed on us. So expectancy violation theory goes with the rule governed nature. And it's a theory that suggests that we developed rules or expectations for appropriate nonverbal behavior and we react when those expectations become violated, right? So we have a certain idea of what we believe is correct. And if it's not followed, we'll react to that. And that's that expectation violation theory. We're almost expecting it if it's not along the lines of what it is that we understand and what we are okay with nonverbally. The ambiguous nature of nonverbal communication, that goes back to perception checking, which we talked about. The skill of asking other observers, right, or persons being observed, whether your interpretation of his or her nonverbal behavior is accurate. So I know that you just said verbally yes, but you shook your head no. So are you sure you're okay with that, or are you really not okay with that? Like, I really want to know how you really feel, right? And that's that perception checking, making sure you get it. The continuous nature of nonverbal, it's constant. The non-linguistic nature is that, again, facial features, arms, right? Physical, smell. The multi-channeled nature of nonverbal communication. I love this because, you know, if you look at anger and disgust, they're the same, right? Fear, happy, neutral, these two look similar. Sad goes with disgust and anger, right? And so, you know, your mouth is such a huge part of that nonverbal communication. And that's the reason why, you know, during COVID and you know, there's a lot of developmental issues that those kids in that time are really dealing with, right? And so there is definitely codes that we can learn with in regards to parents. There's the halo effect, which is attaching positive qualities to people who we deem highly physically attractive. So we just immediately attach qualities to these people just because we find them attractive. Artifacts are clothings or another element of appearance. Anything like that is an artifact. I love my necklaces. Those are considered artifacts in nonverbal communication. Body movement and gestures, postures are kinesics, and that's the study of the human body, the movement. Eye contact, right? Visual dominance ratio is the amount of eye contact made while speaking with others versus listening to them. Facial expressions, touch. This is the study of the human touch. It's called haptics. Touch ethic. It's a person's own guidelines or standards as to appropriate, inappropriate touch. So, this expectancy violation theory falls under, that touch ethic, because some people may not want to get touched. I'm not a hugger. Please don't hug me, right? Don't. Expectancy violation. I'm letting you know, don't hug me, right? Physical environment, space, and territory. There's proxemics, which is the study of how close or far away people are, like proximity. Territoriality, a study of how humans use space and objects to communicate occupancy of ownership. Like, I get onto my desk and I'm in the library and I take up 5 seats, or I'm in the coffee shop and I take up the whole table. I do that all the time. Definitely expectancy violation theory violated here in a coffee shop. Sometimes I just don't care, but that's kind of, I have to take that on, and kind of notice and have empathy. If there's someone that needs my space, allow for them to be in it, even though I'm deciding to be a little bit selfish with my territory. Territorial marker, a thing or action that signifies that area has been claimed, right? So territoriality and territorial markers go together when it comes to territory. And again, this is all the vocabulary. All I'm doing here is just teaching you guys how to speak about these larger concepts. I'm just going over vocabulary with you guys. So, how to interpret nonverbal cues more accurately. There's this concept of immediacy, right? Nonverbal behaviors that communicate feelings of liking, pleasure, and closeness. There's an immediacy with that. Arousal, nonverbal behaviors that communicate feelings of interest and excitement. So immediacy and arousal, those are things like, these are positive nonverbal behaviors. People opening up their chest to you, facing you, right? Dominance, this is nonverbal behaviors that communicate power, status, and control. That's like someone standing over you, someone talking over you, but that's not nonverbal. But if they're standing over you, or kind of standing in front of you, right, this is a dominance. And an application of nonverbal communication research is detecting deception, right? So through immediacy, arousal, and dominance, you're using these cues to understand when you're being decepted. And this is so important. I think in a lot of different jobs and fields, we have to understand this. Human resources, business, criminal justice, right? Communication, even in the medical field, right? Understanding that even though someone's saying that they're not on a drug, and you're about to give them, some sort of antibiotic, or, you're about to give them a steroid, or maybe a painkiller, and they're sitting there telling you that they have never taken a painkiller, but you can see it in their face that they're maybe on a painkiller at that time, right? So you have to use these nonverbal cues to detect deception, okay? And so how do we do that? There's something called response latency. And so that's how long does it take for someone to respond to a question? What's the longevity of their response? And then message duration, how short or long, right, is the message? Because usually when you're being decepted, it's like, oh yeah, right? Or, oh yeah, the reason why is this, and this. My dog ate the homework, and then I got a flat tire, and then, I got in a car wreck, and then I finally got to school, but then my mom died, and I hate to be like that, but that happens, guys. I get that all the time, where people will just give me a list of the reasons why they couldn't turn something in, and I'm like, you might have want to just went with 1, not 5, right? So, this has to do with detecting deception.
Nonverbal is everything that communicates that is nonverbal.
This beautiful theater.
It's communicating to us. How you sit is communicating to us. The things that you attach to yourself such a disappointment. That's true. So I can't tell you how many crime scenes I went through when I would run. Inexpensive scenes. But we look good. We look good. I guess humans are like that. And so all day long, we're making choices. We're making choices that are based on culture, based on peer pressure, personal preferences. And so the things we wear and attach to ourselves are transmitting our bodies are transmitting. The question that I'm often asked is, well, how authentic is it? How authentic is it? And as I pondered this, I said, what do we think of the power of nonverbal communication? Let's do it by taking the myths out of it, plugging in what really matters, what really is valuable when it comes to communication. How many of you have had a bad handshake? And normally, of course now we have the coronavirus, I would have you turn to each other and give each other a handshake that's really bad. But I'm not going to do that. I want you to just put your hand in front of you and pretend to give someone a bad handshake. Ready? Let's do it. Let's do it. Do you realize the funny faces you make? It's like, I didn't ask you to make a funny face, and yet you did. Why is that? Because you're human. And humans betray what we feel, what we think, what we desire, and what makes us
Interesting.
Have you heard that? There's a clinical term for that. It's called grand. Yeah, I said it. Get over it. It's grand. It's a self-hold. You're comfortable? Shit. Where does this nonsense come from?
I love it.
You know, I'm asked the question often. So you spy catcher, you use nonverbals every day. What do you use it for? To make sure people are comfortable. To make sure that we are Carl Sagan, famous ophthalmologist, said, "Who are we? What are we?" And he summed it up this way. And I think it's really sweet. He said, "All we are is the sum total of all the components of us." That's what we are. It's not how much you've heard it. It's not how many times you've heard it. It's really how much you truly are. And what's interesting is that the primary forms of it's that nice handshake. It's a pat on the shoulder. It's that touch of the hand. It is that behavior. You leave here, you're going to have choices. You always have choices. One of the things that you should think about is, how do I change my nonverbals? How do I become the better person for myself? One thing is truly to be and so when I see this, it says it all. That's why we use Thank you.
It's interesting because, right above, and this is again, like, I'm going through what the text gives us as their version of vocabulary. Okay. And this is what I want to make very, very clear to you guys. The reason why you have to get the 8th edition is because terms change. And not only that, as we evolve globally, these terms of communication are constantly changing. And so you do have to make sure when you're in the academic setting that you are getting the latest books, because things change, things update, research is always being done, and there's just always going to be that updated version of, what it is that we're covering. And you actually want the updated versions. But it's interesting. I mean, this is the power of nonverbal communication. This man, Joe Navarro, working for the FBI, like, he's just said quite blank that there is no way of detecting deception. Like, someone could be nervous, and so it's like a double-edged sword, because when you begin to believe that what you're seeing in someone's nonverbal is deception, you're also possibly, sympathizing in the sense of the way that the text says, right? You could be assuming or stereotyping, right? So it's really kind of difficult to put these, like, for sure definitions to some of these terms. And I didn't write this book, but Dr. Ivy, who is a professor at Texas A&M, did. She's one of the writers of this book, and so it'd be interesting to have a conversation with her. And maybe this is something that I can do through, like, a Zoom and record it with her, because yeah, I mean, to be so quite blank, sorry, not quite blank, but so upfront in the text about, detecting deception in a nonverbal way, and then, you have a professional in the workforce that's working for the police saying, well, actually, you just never know what circumstance people are going through, and it may not be that they're decepting you. It could be that they're nervous just from the situation, and this is so true, right? So it's like each and every one of you gets these tools in regards to communication, and then you have to choose where you go with those tools and how you use them. And in the end, it's all about having an awareness. I mean, to me, that's the most important part, is having an awareness of communication, how to describe that awareness, how to understand what to say in situations so you don't get into a conflicting conversation, right? And maybe be aware of the possibility of deception, but not say like, oh, you're being deceptive in the way that you just said something to me, right? That's like a conflicting, aggressive behavior to call someone out. So when we're talking about interpretations, it's just something so that you can be accurate and be aware of what you're observing. And I think that's the best way to see this. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 4, I believe. Yeah. And so some things to remember for this coming week is that I'll place chapter 3, 4 here, but you have your communication model analysis, and so you're going to go to assignments, and you have your who am I. So the communication model analysis is going to be a literal model that you create, and you can do that and submit your PDF of your model, a drawing of your model, but it has to be like a legible drawing, or a Word document of your model.
Beautiful theater.
With descriptions here, brief written summaries. The stuff in bold is what you're going to be focusing on within that model. So when you click on this,
the things that you attach to yourself.
It's due next Friday.
A purse,
write submission.
pen,
here is where you would either place your YouTube channel with the explanation of your model that showcases your model with text, or you attach your model.
And all day long,
right?
we are
you
communicating
and attach the file. And then you would click submit, and that's due next Friday.
You can look in on your child as they sleep, and you can tell if they're having
the Who Am I presentation, right? So you'll be recording, putting this on your YouTube channel. And again, this is about the self. You're going deeper. You're going into the evaluate,
you're giving information up,
right? And really just taking in a lot of that chapter 2 concept of like who you are, and going deeper as to what that means to you.
And
so you're going to choose something that, or really 3 things that you believe make you who you are. And they need to be, a little bit deeper. You're developing a 1 to 2 minute presentation to deliver this in your video. So you don't want the video to go over 2 minutes, right? So it needs to be pretty concise.
Now that I can see you a little clearer.
And so when you do this, you'll take your YouTube channel and you'll just place the link there and submit it. Do not use the comments. Wow. Please do not use the comments, okay? So those are the 2 things that are due.
Your spouses can
I do know that if we go into discussion forum,
so you chose to dress
self-awareness communication video here that's due this Friday.
Even as I chose,
right? I've already gone over this in another video, but this is like Who Am I? But you're just going to be choosing, focusing more on attitudes, beliefs, and values. This is like a practice round for Who Am I?
It would be such a disappointment.
Talk a little bit about the avowed and ascribed in regards to one of the following, right? So you'll choose one, and then you'll talk about the avowed and ascribed, right? So this is a precursor to your Who Am I? So you're
can't
doing
tell you
this
how many
as a
crime scenes I went
this
through
Friday.
that ruined.
Then next Friday you're doing the full 2 minute presentation as the Who Am I, right?
But we look
good.
So
that's that. The next thing we'll talk about is the writing response and quiz. So when you have that, it's going to be here, quiz 1. I have it available as of next Friday, February 3rd. So it'll be available for 24 hours on Friday.
We're making choices.
Right? So you'll just make sure it's a 60-minute quiz. And so you'll go in and you'll take the quiz. It's open book. You have 60 minutes to take it. Okay? And so there's a lot going on Friday. Try to get those presentations.
And so the things we wear and attach to
your Who Am I
ourselves
turned in before Friday, so that on Friday you can focus on your quiz, okay? All right, you guys, I look forward to seeing your Who Am I's, and I've decided to add a new concept to my website this semester, and so I'm like shouting out, you know, fun presentations from students in my film and culture. These are 2 students I decided to shout out this week.
What do we think of
we were going over these 2 films, Inside Out and Interstellar. Inside Out has everything to do with the self, so you guys definitely should watch some of those.
But let's do it by
and even watch the film.
myths
And if you're interested, I can make it available for you to watch
really
in your Blackboard.
values.
In fact, I might just do that
really
if
is
it lets
value
me,
when it
because
comes to
Inside Out
nonverbals.
definitely has a lot to do with the self, and that
How
might
many
help
of you
with
have
your
had a
my
bad
presentation.
handshake?
So if you need to, I can put it in the Blackboard, and you can watch that
Now,
film this
normally-
weekend, and then do your Who Am I.
Of
Okay,
course,
you
now we
guys,
have
well,
the
have a great day.
coronavirus. I would